وَتَصِحُّ خَلْفَ أَعْمَى أَصَمٍ. It is valid behind the blind and deaf. Meaning that the prayer, if the Imam is blind and deaf, then the prayer is valid. He says, وَأَقْلَفْ وَأَقْطَعْ يَدَيْنِ أَوْ رِجْلَيْنِ أَوْ أَنْفٍ. He says also the uncircumcised, one with severed hands, feet, or nose. So the uncircumcised, of course, we understand that's from the aspects of personal hygiene and prophetic, the fitrah, or the prophetic hygiene is to be circumcised, and that's one of the obligations that has been placed upon this ummah, circumcision. However, if someone was uncircumcised, then their leadership of the prayer would be valid, and the prayer behind them, those behind them would also be valid. Of course, a person should take care of purification, because that's one of the benefits of circumcision, in particular for men, is to maintain a level of cleanliness. And a person that had not yet circumcised themselves, or let's say was circumcised, maybe not by themselves this day and age, but by a professional, then they should be wary of this type of issue. The next thing, one with severed hands, feet, or nose. This is mentioned because these are from the obligatory body parts and limbs which must be employed and used in the prayer, in particular the prostration. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said that he was ordered, umirtu an asjuda ala sab'ati a'udin. I was commanded to prostrate on 7 limbs. And he mentioned the hands and the knees and the feet and the forehead as well as the nose. So if someone's nose was severed, or their hands were severed, or their feet were severed, their prayer would still be valid. Ma'al karaha. This is disliked that one lead the prayer, though it is valid, it's disliked due to the difference of opinion among the scholars to the validity of their imama. However, in the madhab, it is valid if they were to lead the prayer, so long as they can meet the pillars of the prayer. Meaning that if they were, if one of the feet or the legs was severed, that they were still able to stand. Because we know that standing in the prayer is from the integral parts of the prayer. It must be done. He goes and he says, وَكَثِيرِ لَحْنٍ لَمْ يَخِلِ الْمَعْنَى. The next part says, one who solecizes often but does not change the meaning. Here is lahn, which means to make mistakes in the recitation. The mistakes here is talking about if you change the vowels, the vowelization of the wording. And this is the leadership of a person that does this in the prayer. They change the vowels, fatha, dhamma, kasra, and then zer, zabr, pesh, I think is the other, right? Yeah. If you mix those up, so long as this mix-up does not change the meaning, your leadership is valid. He says here, but not behind a mute, la khalfa akhras wa kafirin. Not behind a mute, nor behind a disbeliever. Obviously, the disbeliever, we'll get to that as its obvious nature, but the mute is the one that is unable to speak. And of course, if they are unable to speak, then they are unable to recite al-Fātiḥah, which is an integral part of the prayer. And the mute is not allowed to lead in prayer another mute. Understand? As well as he says, the kafir, which is a disbeliever, وَلَوْ بِبِدْعَةٍ مُكَفَّرَةٍ. Even if their disbelief, this is key, even if their disbelief is based on an innovation which has expelled them from Islam. Right, so we know that the innovations in the religion, they are prohibited. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, وَكُلُّ بِدْعَةٍ ضَلَالَةٍ. Every innovation is a going astray. وَكُلُّ ضَلَالَةٍ فِي النَّارِ. And every going astray leads to the hellfire. But there are different classifications as to bid'ah. If you will please hold the questions until the end of the session. Every innovation is astray, and every astray leads to the hellfire. So there are different levels of bid'ah innovation. There are some innovations that are obviously rebellious and sinful, and then there are some innovations which will remove someone from Islam. And so if a person has committed those innovations which have led them outside of Islam, and we talked about that as well before with al-Fātiḥah, which is fisq al-i'tiqad, perhaps he's become extremely rebellious in terms of his doctrine, then this person is not suitable to lead the prayer. And the prayer says, he says here, لا خلف أخرس وكافر. It's not valid behind this one or that one. ولا إمامة عاجز عن شرط أو ركن إلا بمثله إلا الإمام الراتب بمسجد المرجو زوال علته فيصلي جالسا ويجلسون خلفه وتصح قياما. So here he says, there is no leadership for one unable to meet a condition or pillar except with their like, other than the appointed imam of a masjid whose deficiency will likely end. He is to pray seated, and those behind him are to sit, though it is valid to stand. So here basically we're talking about the first point, لا تصح إمامة عاجز عن شرط, a person that is unable to fulfill one of the conditions of the prayer, like najasa, ijtinab al-najasa. They're unable to refrain from or purify themselves or their body or the place of prayer from that which is najis, filth. So if this person is unable to do that, then they are not suitable to lead the prayer. He says, or someone who is unable to perform a rukn, a pillar, except for those that are like them. So for example, if you were in a scenario where you could not purify yourself, or you could not remove something from the place of prayer of filth, and that was the case for everyone is in the same condition, then it's permitted for that imam to lead the prayer, and the prayer is valid for those that are behind. But if he is able to remove but does not, then the prayer is not valid, and his leadership, of course, is not permitted. And the same thing goes for the performance of a pillar. So if someone were unable to perform a pillar like standing in the prayer, if the person was unable to perform this pillar, let's say they were paralyzed and they were unable to stand, but they had to pray in the seat, it's not permitted that they lead the prayer, and it's not valid for those that stand behind, except if they were all paralyzed or all in a condition which they could not stand. And then his leadership is allowable. There's an exception to this. He says, إِلَّا الْإِمَامَ الرَّاتِبَ بِمَسْجِدٍ, except for the imam of the masjid. He's the appointed imam of the masjid, that his illness or deficiency is hoped will come to an end at some point, meaning if he's unable due to weakness or sickness, and he has to sit down in the prayer, it is permitted for him to do so, and it is valid for those standing behind him who are able to stand, and they should follow him in prayer while sitting. So if the imam begins the prayer sitting, then those behind him should sit like him, though it is permissible for them to pray while standing, to perform the prayer as it normally is, because this is the way the prayer is done. However, it should be noted that if the imam begins the prayer standing, and then while he is praying, he reaches a point where he is unable to stand again for some reason, then the followers in the prayer are obliged to continue to stand in the prayer, because this is how it started and this is how it should conclude. So basically what we can understand from this as well is he says, إِلَّا الْإِمَامَ الرَّاتِبَ بِمَسْجِدٍ الْمَرْجُوَ زَوَالَ عِلَّتِهِ, except for the appointed imam of the masjid whose deficiency will likely end. So if the deficiency of the imam, his physical inability to perform the pillars, will not end, then he should step down from that position. So if he was permanently injured or permanently unable to meet the conditions of the prayer, or the conditions or the pillars of the prayer, then he should step down from that position and allow someone that was able to do it. The next point here did hit the news at some point in our communities. وَلَا إِمَامَةُ امْرَأَةٍ وَخُنْثَ لِرِجَالٍ أَوْ خُنَاثَةٍ. He says here, there is no leadership of a woman or hermaphrodite for men or hermaphrodites. He says, so we look at this point here. So he says here, the imama, the leadership of prayer of a woman, is not valid for hermaphrodites. This hermaphrodite is the one that this is the closest term I could find in the Arabic, in this text here, in this context, is a human being that has both sexual organs and has yet to, their actual gender has yet to be determined. So they have the presence of both instruments, if you will, but they are unable to determine if it is male or female. And so a woman is not permitted to lead this type in prayer, because the khuntha could very well be what? A man. Could very well be a man. And so she is not permitted to lead in prayer al-khunatha, which are the hermaphrodites. Nor is she permitted to lead the prayer of a man. And this is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which was reported in the Sunan of Ibn Majah. He says that a woman is not to lead a man. Right, so this is a direct prohibition from our beloved Prophet ﷺ. Nor is a khuntha permitted to lead a man in prayer. And the reason for that is because this hermaphrodite could possibly be a female. It could be a female. The next portion here, he goes on and he says, وَلَا مُمَيِّزٍ لِبَالِغٍ فِي فَرْضٍ. Also, nor the discerning for someone mature in an obligation. So the discerning here is mumayyiz, means it's a young man who has yet to reach the age of puberty. Mumayyiz means they've reached an age of discernment. They know right from wrong. They understand obligations versus habits. They understand the nature of the prayer and its importance and how to do it. So, for example, someone that's 10 or 11 or 12, they haven't reached puberty. So it's not permissible for them to lead the prayer in an obligatory prayer. Fi fardin, he says, in one of the obligatory prayers, meaning the 5 daily prayers. We understand also from this that means it is permitted for a child of this age to lead the extra prayers, like Taraweeh, for example, or something similar to that. It's permitted for them to be the imam in those prayers if so appointed. He goes on in the next portion, he says, وَلَا إِمَامَةُ مُحْدِثٍ أَوْ نَجِسٍ يَعْلَمُ ذَلِكَ فَإِنْ جَهِلَ هُوَ وَمَأْمُومٌ حَتَّى انْقَضَتْ صَحَّتْ لِمَأْمُومٍ وَلَا إِمَامَةُ أُمِّيٍّ. Okay, so this concludes that thought. He says, there is no leadership for the ritually impure or spoiled with najis while known. So basically, similar to what I mentioned previously, that if someone were in a state of ritual impurity, whether that was major or minor, and they knew that they had to make wudu, they knew that they had to make a ghusl, they knew they had to purify themselves in some way or another, then their imama is not valid, nor is the prayer for those behind them. Nor is one that has najis, some type of impurity, bi badani, aw thawbi, aw buqati. So either on the body or the clothing or the place of prayer, if there's some type of najasa, there's some urine or excrement or something there, then it is not valid as long as they know of this impurity. However, he says, if he is unaware, فَإِنْ جَهِلَ هُوَ وَمَأْمُومٍ حَتَّى انْقَضَتْ صَحَّتْ لِمَأْمُومٍ وَلَا إِمَامٍ. He says, okay, so here he goes on, he says, but if he does not know, he's not aware of this, nor is the ma'mum, meaning the follower, he doesn't know of the imam's impurity until they conclude the prayer. Then the prayer will be valid for the ma'mum, but it will not be valid for the imam. So, for example, the imam does not know that he has to make wudu or purify his clothing, and then concludes the prayer, and then is reminded or is informed that he has to make wudu, or there's something on his clothes, or they see something, or they come into the knowledge of his lack of purity, then the people that prayed behind him, their prayer is valid. But the imam coming into this knowledge now has to go and purify himself and re-perform the prayer, because purification is one of the conditions to the prayer. So this is something that has to be met. He says, وَلَا إِمَامَةُ أُمِّيٍّ. There is no leadership in prayer for the ummi. The ummi is the illiterate, if you will. They cannot read al-Fātiḥah, as is understood customarily. They cannot read al-Fātiḥah. Al-Shaykh rahimahullah, he says here, after that, he explains himself. وَهُوَ مَنْ لَا يُحْسِنُ الْفَاتِحَةِ. He is the one that does not يُحْسِنُ الْفَاتِحَةِ, essentially meaning here, does not properly read it, let alone memorized it to read it. أو يُدْغِمُ فِيهَا مَا لَا يُدْغَمُ. Or he renders a dipthong what is not to be rendered such. What this means here is he essentially combines letters together that should not be combined. And the Imam mentions an example of this. He says the example of this is كَإِدْغَامِ هَا لِلَّهِ فِي رَا رَبِّ. So in the Fatiha we know it says Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. So here the way that this works is they say Lillahi Rabbil Alameen. So they change the ha into a ta. And they say Lillahi Rabbil Alameen. Idgham ma la yudgham. Right, so this is something that would invalidate the prayer, of course, and would render his leadership impermissible. And then he says, "Oh, yalhanu lahnan yuhilul ma'na." Here is to make mistakes in the recitation, solecizes in a way which changes the meaning. And this, as I mentioned, changes either some letters or changes the vowelization. So for example, in al-Fatiha we say ihdina sirat al-mustaqim, ihdina bil kasra. If you were to change it to a fatha, ahdina, ahdina. So ihdina means guide us, ahdina means give us gifts. So you change the meaning totally. Or if he were to say, when we say iyyaka na'budu, iyyaka na'budu, if he says iyyaki. So iyyaka is you alone, masculine. Iyyaki is you alone, feminine. So he changed the gender here in this case. Or various other, for example, an'amta. If he says an'amtu, an'amta means which you have bestowed, an'amtu which means I have bestowed. So you can see a great difference in the meaning there. Or if he were to change, for example, a recitation of some letters, to change the letters, improper pronunciation of letters, to change them to a different letter. Except the fuqaha of the madhab, they say except for al-dad. And if they were to take, for example, maghdubi and ad-dallin, those two words, if they were to change that letter to dha, and that's the only exception that's given due to the difficult nature of the pronunciation. As for the other letters there, if they are changed, they are rendered different sounds, they are made into a dipthong, which is not to be done, then it is not allowable. And he says here at the end, ajzan an islahihi illa bimithli, and basically he is incapable of improvement, meaning that if he makes the mistake and he is unable to fix it, or he does not fix it, then it is invalid, except, he says, illa bimithlihi, except him leading those that are similar in error and mistake. So there's no one else among the congregation that can recite al-Fātiḥah except with the same mistakes that he has. Then and only then is his leadership permissible and valid for those that follow him in the prayer.